You are listening to Mollie on a Trip, music around Paris on Paris Underground Radio.
Hello, you have reached Mollie at Mollie on a Trip, music around Paris podcast on the Paris Underground Radio Network. I'm a former music executive from the United States who decided to leave my life in LA behind and move to Paris in 2022. Here on the podcast, I'll be speaking to musicians, songwriters, producers, and music executives from both Paris and abroad about what they love about this city. We hear where they like to hang out, where they like to play or see music, and my own personal favorite, what their favorite places to eat and drink are. Today, I talked to Joshua Radin, who is a singer-songwriter, originally from Cleveland, was a longtime LA resident, and then ended up making the move to sort of nomad life, but definitely spends big chunk of time in Paris and all over Europe, a lot of time in Stockholm. He's also an old friend of mine, and I just got to see him play in Paris, so he was a perfect person to talk to. He loves it, and we get to hear about how he actually comes to Paris every single album to walk around by himself for a week and listen to the recordings before he finishes mixing and mastering. So this is a really special place for his music, and it was really interesting to hear his thoughts. So please enjoy Joshua Radin. Hello, Joshua Radin.
Hello, Mollie Lehman.
Where are you currently?
I am in my hotel room in Stockholm, Sweden. I just got back from tour yesterday.
Amazing. And you really like Stockholm, right?
I do. I love it. But I rented an apartment here until September, and it's not available for the next 3 weeks, so I'm just hoteling it till it's ready.
Not the worst life to live, huh?
No, I never really complain.
So you and I kind of both made the same decision to bounce out of Los Angeles and come to Europe.
Mm-hmm.
I was just wondering what your impetus was for that and like why Europe, and are you planning to have that be a lot of Stockholm or just travel?
Oh, okay. Well, why did I leave Los Angeles? So many reasons, but I would say right before the pandemic, I was thinking about leaving Los Angeles, and then I was sort of on the fence. And then when I got locked away in my house by myself for so long, I don't know, it was tough in LA. It became like Hollywood became a bit apocalyptic, actually. Boarded up places that I loved, like the ArcLight, and losing Amoeba Records to a different location. I don't know, there were a lot of restaurants and bars and cafes that shut down. And I think a lot what happened was, that city is run basically by people from Mexico and also young starving artists, actors, that when production shut down, they were working in bars and cafes as waiters, and as you do when you're struggling to find a part in a film or something. And when those were no longer available, I think a lot of those artists / waiters moved back home to where they're from with their parents or, somewhere. And the city lost so much. It lost a lot of vibe. So I don't know. There's so many reasons. I've been tired of LA after 11 years, being in a car culture, having to drive everywhere. I love to walk. I love walking everywhere. And that's one of the reasons I love European cities. I just love walking around, getting lost and stopping I love cafe culture, and LA doesn't really have that. But I could sit in a cafe and people watch with a book and drink some wine and eat cheese and bread basically all day. And that's just way more European than it is American.
Yeah, well, that actually leads to kind of my next question, because I saw your show the other night at Point Ephémère, which I probably butchered. Sorry, French speakers.
I'm going to guess that it's Point Ephémère.
Well, you know what?
It could be.
You are doing better than me.
I don't know. Je ne sais pas.
That venue, I really liked it. I love being on the canals. It's so cool. It's like, what's the capacity? Like 400?
I couldn't tell you, but that seemed like about it. It's pretty cozy.
It was such a good sized room, and the people there, everyone was so attentive. It was super fun. It sounded good. We had a good time in the green room after. The bar outside was cool. I don't know. I thought it was a really fun vibe. I really enjoyed the show.
Thank you. I enjoyed it as well. It's always fun when friends are in the audience. Those are always my favorite shows by far. I could be playing in a room with 50 people or 1,000 people. It doesn't matter. They're all the same to me. But if friends or family are in the crowd, it makes all the difference. You try so much harder.
Yeah. I did try to heckle you. I'm not sure if you heard me.
Luckily, I didn't.
A lot of love, a loving heckle is what it was.
Of course.
I
Bien sûr. Bien sûr.
You had sort of mentioned to me, and I thought it was interesting that when you're touring, you're like, I have to go to Paris. And I wanted to know why it is that no matter what your European tours, you're like, I must go to Paris. What is it about the city and like, how has that worked?
I think like what I was just saying, being a cafe culture type of person, I mean, I can't imagine a city in the world that has better cafe culture than Paris. I love cheese, I love bread, and I love wine. I mean, my top three favorite things. There's nothing like walking around Paris. In fact, I always have a tradition, or when I finish an album, I would take a trip to Paris by myself for like a week or two and put the album, once it's mixed, in my earbuds or in my headphones and walk Paris and listen to it over and over again in different places and different museums, different restaurants. And then I would come back to the mixer with notes after like a week or two of listening to it.
Wow.
And it was always Paris. It's just something about, I love traveling with people, but I also love traveling solo. And Paris is, I think, my favorite place to be solo.
Is it because it's A, super interesting and B, really walkable? Or is there something just kind of about the magic here?
There's something about the magic. I'm sure it's the romanticism of a kid from Cleveland, Ohio, like thinking about Paris, taking French in 8th grade, 9th grade, and, reading French literature. And I guess I grew up as a Francophile. And, French people, especially Parisians, have such a reputation, this stereotype of being rude. But I've never really found that because wherever I go, I try to learn one phrase in their language, which is immediate. I'm very deferential. And I'm like, I apologize right away for not speaking their language and ask them if they speak English. But I'm not like a typical American walking in and just speaking English, because most people do speak English in major cities. And I've always found that if you treat the Parisians like with respect, and because they're so guarded about their culture and their language, that if you treat them with respect and try, that they're always like very, very amiable, and they're just so appreciative that you even tried. And if your accent is okay, they're like, thank you for not ruining our beautiful language. And then they're like, yeah, of course I speak English, a little bit. And then everything's fine. It's just, but you have to break down that first wall for a second. Whereas a lot of Americans, I feel like, don't do in Paris and give us a terrible stereotype for the Parisians.
Yeah, and you're making a super valuable point, which is something that I've actually stopped a bunch of Americans and been like, look, if someone walks up to you in your country and just started speaking in a foreign language to you, you'd be like, what are you doing? Like, this is so weird for you to come up and just start speaking to me in Japanese. Like, you're not in Japan, like, whatever. So the assumption, the assumptiveness to just go up to any Parisian when you're in their store and to not say like, désolé, parlez-vous anglais, like just to start there. It's just, it's logical. I just think that people forget because there are so many European countries where people do speak so much English, but it really is important here. Like it really does go like a super long way. So
more so than any city in Europe I've ever been to, really.
I agree. Do you remember the first time, like when was the first time you came here to the country?
The first time was when I was 16. I studied in Nice for like a month in the summertime. It was part of like a exchange thing. It was like 1 month of like July in Nice. But I had no idea what I was doing. I like saved up money, like mowing lawns and working in a cafe so I could like buy a plane ticket to the south of France as like a 16-year-old who like, I figured I'd take some French classes but then the person who ended up hosting me was this older woman who apparently had just taken the money from the school and was supposed to be feeding me, and and the food was, she was pocketing all the money, I believe, and just like putting out like a putting out like a can of tuna or something, and just like it was terrible, but it was an amazing experience. And I had like no money. I spent all my money on the plane ticket. I thought everything would be covered.
Well, yeah.
When I got there, like meals and things like that. So I was living on like a baguette and like a nectarine and like a wedge of cheese a day, but just like walking around and being 16 and like having the best time still.
That sounds amazing. Actually, good learning experience about being taken advantage of.
Exactly.
That's incredible. I really like Nice as well. I think it's beautiful down there. We like it a lot. Was it super hot in July?
Yeah, and that was an interesting experience for a young American when you're like so hot and you're sweating in your bedroom and you're like, oh my God, oh, Europe doesn't really have air conditioning.
Sure doesn't. I found that actually interesting also last summer when we went up to Stockholm because it was last summer was crazy hot, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And a lot of the hotels, like they had a cold air button that actually just sort of like wafted
Yeah.
like less warm air. I don't know.
Yeah, it's just one of those things. You understand being from the Midwest like I am. When you grow up, it's like those summers, it's so humid and hot. Like if you don't have air conditioning, I mean, you just get used to it. Everyone has it in America. So not everybody, but you know what I mean? Like it's very common. And you just get used to that aircon feel. And Europeans are just not about it. I mean, I've had so many Europeans come to visit me in LA before I sold my house. In the summertime in LA, I'd keep the central air going and keep the house cool. And they'd be sleeping, being like, "Is there any way we could turn this off? It's freezing in here." You know, it's just two different cultures. You're just not used to it.
Yeah, and I think those are actually the things no one really tells you about, when you're culture shifting into Europe. And it's interesting. And you're like, oh, I might not prefer this, but it's fine. Like everyone's fine.
Yeah, you do acclimate if you can just get the hotel to put a fan in your room, and you're kind of like, okay, this is what it is. But it sounds so horribly American every time I talk about air conditioning. When I'm in Europe, people are just like, "What's wrong with you people in America and your air conditioning? Why do you have to be freezing all the time?"
I actually have thought about that. Like if it was that temperature outside, I'd wear a jacket.
Yeah. But I think it's just when you're sleeping. I'm just so used to like not sweating. And another thing, like they don't really do top sheets here. So like I'm in a hotel room now, I've got a huge duvet. It's like this
Right.
comforter, like this big quilt comforter. But so that's what you have to sleep with on you. There's no sheet between you and the sheet, which is American. It's so common that for men, especially because men and women differ so much in terms of body temperature when you're sleeping, that women are generally colder and men are usually warm when they're sleeping. And you're like, men need that top sheet. I don't want a duvet when I'm sleeping at all.
Right. It's actually supposed to it's harder to sleep when you're warm because it takes energy because your body wants to be cooler when it's asleep.
Of course. You get the deepest sleep when you're cold. Like I love sleeping out under the stars, like camping when it's cold out, like in a sleeping bag and your nose is freezing, but you kind of like duck into your sleeping bag. When you wake up in the morning, you're like, I don't want to get out of bed because it's freezing. And then you fall back asleep. But if it's hot, you're up right away because you're like, I'm just sitting here sweating. This sucks.
It's going to be interesting though with like the sort of global warming aspect of things because last summer was in France at least it was brutal. I think people like died like it was like that hot. Like in Paris it got so hot.
All of Europe there were fires all over like Sardinia and Italy. I mean, all of Europe
It was
was
bad.
in the UK. I think it recorded the hottest summer in years and years and years. It was sweltering for like August and July.
Yeah, maybe that's when we go like to northern Norway. Bergen was nice.
Yeah, like in Scandinavia, people talk about all the time, like, who knows, like 100 years from now, if we're still around on this planet, like with climate change, everyone's going to be moving to Scandinavia.
Right, right, totally. Back to Paris. I wanted to ask you if you have any like favorite places here, like either specific restaurants or areas, and then also if you had specific places that you liked playing or seeing music, or if you're just sort of like a wandering bear and like Josh does different things every time.
It's more the latter. I don't make any plans, as you know, because as I was rolling in on the tour bus to Paris, we were like back and forth about where should we eat? What restaurant are we going to eat tomorrow night? And I hadn't made any reservations because I never know what I'm going to feel like, when I want to eat, who I'm going to be with, you know. And I hate that feeling of having to like call a restaurant and be like, okay, now it's 5. Wait, now it's 6 people. Wait, can we do 7:30? Wait, now it's 9. It's just like I like to walk around and want to eat when I'm hungry. And if I see a place, I look in and I'm like, I mean, most of those cafes in Paris, Brandon and I, for those listening, my best friend Brandon, who plays guitar with me, he's very much the same. We just like to walk around, get lost, and we'll stumble into a cafe, kind of look inside. And if they've got confit de canard, it's always good.
Right.
It's just like such a French thing where it's so easy to find and it's always prepared the exact same way. It's always good. so that's generally what I'll do. And I'll get some cheese and some bread. And I don't know, like I don't really have a lot of favorite restaurants in Paris. I just like to walk. If I get hungry, I see a place and I'll sit down and just stuff because it's generally just all very good. And I found that the few times that I've been in Paris and eaten in like very fancy restaurants, I kind of prefer the cafe food.
If you're enjoying this episode of Music Around Paris, you may also be interested in our sister podcast, City of Muses. It's about artistic creators and their inspirations. Mollie on a Trip, Music Around Paris will be right back after a word from our sponsors. And now, back to Mollie on a Trip, Music Around Paris. I will say, I think that there is a gradient. I call them like red awnings. You know how like a lot of the bistros have red awnings? I do think there's like a gradient on it because sometimes you can just tell that the bread is fresher or like the meat is like really high quality. And I actually like, I need to find or I want to make a list of like the best red awnings or the best bistro in each arrondissement because it's like,
yeah, you should.
You know they're there. It's just like they look kind of the same. So you're like, which one is like the actual like jam? And like there's some Palbert, there's like a couple that everyone knows about, but those ones are impossible to get into. Like you like
right.
It's weeks.
That's why I never end up at one of those places because I'm a spontaneous eater.
Yeah. And then is there any neighborhoods that you like here or is that the same thing? It's just kind of like you like to explore each one as you come. Because you like Saint-Germain, right?
I love walking Saint-Germain. I love just walking past the art galleries and looking in, and it's just such a great place to walk around. And I love, obviously, like, I don't know, it's so stunning just walking the Seine. I mean, over bridges and just getting lost and just, I don't even look where I'm going on my phone or, on a map or something. I'll come to a point and just be like, I'll look right and look left and be like, I'm going that way. It just looks cooler or looks prettier. Or I do try to stay off the main roads, like the heavily trafficked streets. I like the little quaint cobblestoney kind of narrow streets. Little cat, yeah. Let's see. I love, as far as this last time, didn't get to go to the d'Orsay, but I've never even had to get a ticket before. But you were telling me like you should go. I was just planning on going, and then I looked online. And I was like, oh, it's all sold out for the whole day, and that's never happened to me. I've been there so many times, 10, 11 times, and just walked up to the museum and just walked right in, bought a ticket and walked in. But I don't know, maybe things are changing. So
I don't know if it's a post-pandemic thing or whatever, but you can still do walk up as far as I know, most museums. But I will say that, I don't know, I think you and I are both allergic to waiting in lines, like after being in the music business for too long, like I can't do it. So
I won't do it. I don't care like how good something is. I won't wait in line for it.
Yeah, I won't either.
It has nothing to do with like, sometimes I get ripped on by friends. They're like, no, let's go here. And I'm like, there's a line outside. And they're like, what, are you too cool to wait in a line? I'm like, it has nothing to do with being too cool. I'm just impatient.
Yeah, it's just like I would rather spend my time like doing literally anything else. Like I can't imagine doing that. All right. Well, this has been great. And I wanted to sort of end with like, what is your deal for the summer musically? Like, are you touring, music coming out? Like, what's the plan?
No, I still have a few more songs coming out on this final. I think I have 3 more songs out of the 10 that's coming out on my new album. 7 are out already. I've been releasing a new song every 6 weeks. And then I'm just going to write more here in Stockholm. There's a lot of musicians and producers I love working with. And then I'm basically off. I just finished this European tour and I'm off till my US tour in September. So I'm going to Europe for the summer, and then I won't be able to stay here in Europe anymore because I only get 6 months out of the year to be in Schengen countries. And then I'll go chase the sun somewhere, like other hemisphere, like I did this last winter. I was just in warm places and booking a few gigs here and there to have fun and make some cash. But it's really just, I don't know. I'm loving the not knowing. I've been nomading for a year and a half, and I have no idea where I'm going to settle down next. But I feel like when I know, I'll do it.
I was thinking about this today, literally, that it's so interesting being adulting and being like, I feel the same way. I don't know what the next year of my life's going to look like. I mean, I hope to be in France, and who knows, like things might shift. And I always thought when I was young that I don't know, that just like adults knew what they were doing or whatever. And I am really reveling in not knowing, and that it's okay to not know, and actually like, going to be fine. Just going to do what feels good and follow that.
Yeah, having a lot of options in life is a blessing and a curse. It's definitely a blessing more than a curse, but it's not perfect. Like there are some times where
Yeah.
you can't settle down with a person or a location or a job or because you just have all these things going on. We're like, well, I could do that, or I could be with this person, or I could live there, or I could live in an apartment, I could live in a house, I could buy a boat and sail somewhere. It's like with all that freedom comes, again, not complaining about it at all. With all that freedom come all those options, and it makes it a bit difficult to to say, okay, this is what I'm going to do for the next 30 years or something. I don't know.
Oh yeah, I don't like want to do anything for 30 years. I think I've
Well, that's the
decided.
difference.
Like I think
Well,
I
but when we were growing up, like when you're talking about adulting, adults, that's what they did. They were like, they went to college, they became a lawyer or they became a banker or a doctor or a accountant or whatever. They chose their path, and that was their path until retirement, till the gold watch. And,
right.
like, I just think that's gone out the window for a lot of people.
Happily in it. Well, let's find a time to hang this summer in Europe again because that was so fun.
I'll probably come back to Paris soon, and you guys should come to Stockholm if you can, because it's
Oh, hell yeah.
stay longer. It's just, especially if it gets really hot in Paris, it doesn't really get hot except for like up here, maybe in August for a couple weeks, or there might be one like weekend heat wave in July, but really the summers are the best here.
And also I just wanted to also tell you I'm still listening to Man of the Year like all the time. Like it's on.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and and this is like truth. I have it on this playlist I've been listening to a lot, but I kind of keep forgetting it's you. And then I'm like, God, this song's so good. And then I like open up and I'm like, oh, right, Josh Radin again.
Oh, thank you.
But I'm really, really loving that song. I hope a lot of people hear it. So anyways, thanks for coming on the podcast. And
Oh, yes. Well, I'm so honored.
yeah, seriously, thank you so much for chatting. And I also learned something about you today about this Paris mixing walking around thing. I don't know. I think that's super special. It actually gave me a little moment about how special this city is.
Yeah, I've done it for 10 albums.
Wow, that is so incredible. I'm also going to listen to your albums and know that now. And I think that's
it's just the best city. I mean, it's just the best walking city.
Well, I'm going to go walk it on my way to a doctor's appointment. So I will talk to you soon. And thank you so much.
Love you, girl.
Thanks for being here today. Hope you enjoyed the chat on Mollie on a Trip, Music Around Paris. Please check out the other great podcasts on the Paris Underground Radio Network. If you have a second, also, please rate us on Apple Podcasts. It does actually help. And if you want to find me, I'm at Mollie on a Trip on Instagram, and I'd love to chat about music and food and wine and everything Paris. And I'm also super happy to hear suggestions for future guests. Thanks.
Mollie on a Trip, Music Around Paris was produced by Jennifer Garrity for the Paris Underground Radio Podcast Network.